in shortly. So the agenda for today, let me just pull that up just a second. Yes, so is my screen visible?
Yes, Kanchan.
Yes, Kanchan, yes.
Yes. Thanks. So good morning, everyone. So today we are on day 3 for session 5 on sharing transboundary collaborative opportunities. So we'll have reporting back from the parallel sessions. So the hosts for this sessions are Dr. Dr. Shrestha, myself, Kanchan Shrestha, and also Mr. Santosh Raj Pathak from ICIMOD. We will talk briefly about what we're going to do today, and then so today we'll have the reporting back. We'll hear from community-based disaster risk management session that happened on Tuesday on the 15th of December afternoon, as well as the GLOF session on Glacier Lake outburst floods that also happened on Tuesday afternoon on the 15th of December. Then we'll hear from landslides and sedimentation, floods and drought as well that happened yesterday. So if you missed any of the sessions, this is a great way to get a quick summary of what was happening, what were the key discussion points. And then we will have a presentation from Dr. Aditya Bastola on gender equity, social inclusion in DRR in the Koshi Basin. Then we have an interesting panel discussion from different representatives from Nepal, India, and China on how can we implement the transboundary collaborative action, and you know what could be some of the ways. So we'll have we'll have a panel discussion where please do put forth your questions in the chat box for the panelists. Then we will have concluding remarks, and that will be the end of this morning session. In the afternoon, just for anybody who has missed previous briefings about it, in the afternoon we do have a media session where we will hear stories from journalists and reporters who've been reporting on stories from the Koshi Basin. So it will be an exciting session. So in the afternoon, do tune in to this session as well. Now going ahead, so the objectives are to, for this session, are to just develop a common understanding of what happened, what were the discussions on these sessions, and also to hear from you on your perspectives on what should be the focus on collaborative actions and how can you support it. So if the time permits, we might be doing a few interactive activities as well. So please do listen in and participate as well. Now, without further ado, I would like to go into the session where the session reporting is starting. So first up is for the CPDRM session. Just a second. Yes, so Neeraji, you seem very ready. Are you ready to go?
Yes, Kanchan,
yes.
Thank you.
May I briefly introduce you if possible? So Dr. Neera Shrestha Pradhan is the Senior Water and Adaptation Specialist at ICIMOD. She's also the Program Coordinator for Strengthening Water Resources Management in Afghanistan, and she has been anchoring, co-leading the Community-Based Disaster Risk Management Transboundary Working Group under the Koshi Disaster Knowledge Hub with Dr. Nishikant Gupta, and they, from what I hear, they had a great session. So over to you, Neeraji, please let us know what happened in the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kanchan. Can you see my slide full screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I am presenting this on behalf of the group that on 15th we had a discussion on community-based disaster risk management. One of the major session objective was also to share the success stories, also grounded good practices, lessons learned, and then how we can scale it up and out in the Koshi Basin. So it was not only from the Koshi Basin itself, but also from beyond the basin. We presented some good success stories. Then also understanding cross-cutting issues like gender, governance, livelihood aspects, but also to come out with some challenges and opportunities for CBDRM implementation. in the Koshi Basin, and then we came out with some recommendation for the future. We also wanted to look at CBDRM from science, policy, and practice interface perspective. That is why we divided the session into two parts. One on science supporting practice, and the second part on policy supporting the practice. However, we also realize that it is not only science and policy supporting practice, but also we need to see people working on the ground level, people working at the community should come out with good examples on the ground, evidence-based, so that it can help the policy making process, as well as we should be able to demand from the scientists and researchers what we need to support the work that we are doing at the community level, the science-based support. So that was the major discussion of this session. We had almost 40 participants in a parallel session. That is very good, and very good representation from Nepal and India, but few from China and beyond. Women and men, we might be able to come out later only. We started the session with the reflection of Kdkh inaugural session, where the senior and high-level panelists very much focused on local innovations and initiatives that are important. Also, planning and implementation actions at the local level is the need of an hour, but also sharing successes and good experiences for collaborative action in Koshi Basin. So this matches with what we have come out from the online survey, which was conducted just before this Kdkh event. It was within the core team members only, so the representation is quite low. However, from their experience, we came out that localized action is very important and is one of the major recommendation. Research, besides research and knowledge sharing, and integrating CBDRM in policy and planning processes. Let me briefly touch upon what are the case studies that we looked at. The first one interesting is the citizen science concept for CBDRM that Oxfam TROSA is working, where we capacitate the local communities so that they can monitor the quality of river, they can do the analysis and come out with some information that will be useful at the community level. So involvement of communities is very important when we are talking about science. The second case was a global award-winning case on index-based flood insurance by IMI. So here we looked at crop insurance and how it helps increase the resilience of the communities. One of the important things that struck us was the study came out with even a 1% increase in insurance penetration reduced the disaster recovery burden on developing countries by 22%. So the importance of insurance when we are talking about disasters. The next was from Caritas on community-based approach and developing cross-scale partnerships, especially looking at the nutrition, which is also important when we are talking about floods and other disasters. Then yet another global award-winning story on community-based flood early warning system, where we looked at different organizations like ICIMOD is also working, Oxfam, and other Uganda also working on the ground, and many others on how the early information to the communities, reaching the communities using very simple technologies can help them prepare themselves and give early information to the communities to save lives and livelihood. From Oxfam, we also looked at different pathways to community resilience, where there are different examples talking about collaborative actions are important, understanding of risk and vulnerability, long-term actions are important when we're looking at resilience, and also some of the understanding and iterative learning on ongoing adaptive management approaches. But also, we also looked at very good analysis on community-driven DDRM in the federal context of Nepal, where the opportunity is now in this changed context at the community level, local government to work on disaster risk management, a very good analysis on that. So out of all these presentations, we came out different. We had a very good interactive session, very good discussion, but here to present, I've taken some key points. For the key challenges, again, looking at science, policy, and supporting practice and vice versa, we looked at introduction of science and technology-oriented solutions are good for resilience building, but if it does not include the communities from the very beginning, if the communities are not integrated in the process, if they are not involved, then the ownership of the communities will not be there, and the sustainability of the project remains question. The next one on policy, when we looked at the policy analysis, we also realized that there is a loose connection in policies at central and local level. I will not say that there is no connection, there is, but very loose connection, and integration of DRR needs across multiple levels. Also in practice, we realize that DRR solutions are there, but not necessarily that it reaches every time to the vulnerable groups, like the flood insurance. It needs land holding certificate, but not all the farmers have that. So these are some of the challenges that we face when we are talking about CBDRM. Some of the proposed action for the transboundary collaboration, because community-based DRM, we realize that it is not only at the national or the regional level, but when it goes to the community level, it happens to be more successful, and stories we have already mentioned about it. The first one action is to prepare a comprehensive mapping to understand the different stakeholders, the technologies, innovations in the basin, but also to generate evidence base to share data to quantify risks and estimate loss and damage so that it can be used for policy making process. And the third one, we also realized that development and implementation, not only developing, but implementation of cohesive and coordinated plans and policies that consider the needs of local communities as well as the transboundary nature of the disasters. So here, considering the need of local communities is very important when we are proposing any action at the transboundary level. So these are a few of the key proposed actions, but I think when we come out with the main report, we have all. So 6 key messages that came out from our session. This is my last slide. I want to read it. The first one is disaster risk reduction measures call for local innovations and interventions. Second, shift from disaster risk resilience and from relief and recovery to preparedness is important. We need to ensure community engagement and GESI integration for successful DRM solutions. And we also have to see that we create an enabling environment at local, subnational, national, transboundary level for inclusive DRM. We also have to address underlying risk factors and link CBDRM with resilient livelihoods and sustainable development. Unless and until we are able to link it with the livelihood and sustainable development, the community ownership might be difficult. And then the last but not the least is very importantly, we need to strengthen the country as well as transboundary knowledge networks. This is where we will be able to share our good practices and knowledge and interact with each other more from science and evidence-based perspective rather than any other issues that is happening at the transboundary level. With this, I would like to end my presentation here. Thank you, Kanchan. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Neeraji, for your very succinct presentation. I just wanted to take a few questions. If there are any questions on this, please put your questions on the chat box. I think the discussions were great, and as the questions are coming in, what I wanted to ask you briefly is there certain areas that the group thought that they could work together on? Have they identified any action points for themselves, or are they planning to integrate some of these learnings into their own annual plans or anything like that?
We were not able to discuss that much in detail, but the presentations generated a good amount of interest among the participants, especially when we talked about the insurance schemes, like how it happens, how it goes to the ground, how it can be implemented, and also the flood early warning systems, how communities can benefit from one country sending the information to the other. So these are some of the discussions that really generated interest, and also citizen science concept, how we should bring in the citizens and the communities even when we are talking about science, So these are some of the interesting discussions that were generated. I can see some of Some of my presenters and Nishikant is also there. Please add if you would like to add anything in this regard.
Yes, thanks very much, Neeraji. I also see a raised hand. Arunji, would you like to place your question or comment?
Yeah, first of all, congratulations to the team, CBDRM team. I think it was a very, the swath of discussion, I think, seemed to be quite broad from what you have presented. Just one curiosity, I think one of your point, key message is about creating enabling environment at different levels, right? So absolutely correct. But um, were you able to go a little bit deeper into what it meant at different level, local, subnational, national, and even at transboundary level, to decipher what that set of word comprising of enabling condition, creating enabling condition means? That would be very interesting because we are thinking of actually practical actions, right? So it would be good to know what the group actually thought were those conditions. Thank you, Neera.
Thank you, Arundai, for the very important question. As I mentioned earlier, we discussed again and again about how science and policy can support the practice on the ground. So enabling condition here, we by saying so, we meant that it's like, there's how science can support the work on the ground at the local level, but also policy, but vice versa also. It's not only when we look at the work on the ground, we normally say, okay, science should support us or policy should support us, but also the enabling condition that we create at the local level through science and policy, but also how the communities themselves can work. Look at the example of citizen science. The communities are able to work among themselves, but they need support from scientists. They need support from policymakers to take it forward. So accordingly, also whatever we have showcased on the ground, we want scientists and policymakers to come and have a look at these good examples, and then how we can how it can be considered in the policy making process, as well as there are few things that as working on the communities we need from the scientists. We need to ask them, we need to demand them, this is what we need for our work on the ground to have scientific backstopping. So in order to do that, we need to work together. Good collaboration and understanding is required at different levels, not only talking about local, national, and regional, but also among scientists, policymakers, and the community practitioners and the community level. So we discussed at various levels about that.
Thank you, Neera. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neeraji, and thank you, Arunji, for your question. If there are no other questions, then we will move ahead, but please feel free to put your questions in the chat box, and then Neeraji and the team from the CBDRM session can continue to answer them.
Thank you so much, Kanchan, and I would like to thank all the presenters and sub-session facilitators from our group. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I think the points that came up from the group were quite interesting, particularly around insurance and also the transboundary early warning systems and the communities, the challenges at the community level. And I think there were also very good discussions around the enabling environment, perhaps for the transboundary collaboration. Now, going ahead a little bit, I would now like to invite Vishnu Pandey to present about the GLOF transboundary session. If I can just pull up her information, give me just a second. Vishnu Pandey is a remote sensing and geospatial analyst at ICIMOD. Her area of expertise lies in glaciology, glacial hazard, and remote sensing areas. So now I would like to invite Vishnu to present about what happened in the GLOF session, and she co-hosted the session with Jacob from ICIMOD. So Vishnu, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Kanchan. Let me share my slide first. Can you see my slide on your screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so hello everyone, good morning. I'm Vishnu Pandey and a group lead for the GLOF Transboundary Working Group. I'll be sharing the summary report from the Glacier Lake Outburst Flood session. And in the session, my colleague Jacob and myself co-host this session and had been assisted by Riju and Yathartha in the rapporteuring task. So let me start from the agenda of the session. The session started with a brief introduction of the session and the result sharing from the consultation series on the standardization of GLOF risk assessment methodology that was conducted on the 19th of November. Then after the session was divided into 4 parts, sessions 1 and subsession 1 and 2 were dedicated to present the partners' new research finding and different technology adapted to reduce GLOF risks. And there were altogether 6 presentations, and 4 were from the female presenters and 2 from the male presenters, and we have the participants from the 4 different countries. So in the subsession 3, it was about the knowledge and experience sharing in the GLOF risk reduction and early warning system initiative, a case study from the India Glacier Lake in Nepal. Subsession 4 was for the group discussion, and we discussed and developed an action plan for following years. And we did a small survey using the Mentimeter to collect the feedback from the session. And lastly, we wrap up the session. So to tell about the few background of these sessions, the Glacier Lake outburst flood is one of the big issue in the Koshi basins. And if we even look at the historical events, we found that there are altogether 26 GLOF events, where 6 GLOF events were from 1990 and 4 were from 2015. And the recent study also revealed that there are 42 potential dangerous glacial lakes. So this kind of data implies that the study of glacial lake is very essential to understand lake situation in order to reduce the GLOF risks in the future. So this session brings together both the expert and early careers scientists working in the field of glacier and the glacial lakes, as this was the first meeting of the GLOF Transboundary group and the Beyond to show off their research and findings. So the first objectives of this session was to share the knowledge and research finding to understand glacial lakes and GLOF in the Koshi Basin. And second is to improve understanding of the different technologies and application for reducing GLOF risks. And lastly was to discuss and develop the action plans and recommended areas for the future collaborative work. So from this slide, I will be summarizing what we collected from what we gained from the presentations were that the number and area of glacial lakes are increasing, which means small glacial lakes are forming and expansion rate of lake are increasing. And there is a likelihood of risks from GLOF where the glacial lake shows significant expansion trend. And it is necessary to understand and identify the driving forces for GLOF based on the assessment criteria and historical GLOF events. The risk assessments using hydrodynamic models are very helpful to predict the dynamic process of GLOF and its impact to the downstream at different dam failure scenarios. However, we also felt that there are different challenges in the model uncertainty to predict the results and information. Validating the model to the site is almost impossible, since most of the GLOF are one-off events, and there was also discussed that we should have the field data collections. But the discussion also came up that the data collection is very important to valid, but in the realistic situation, it is very difficult, as most of the stations were already washed away, and discharge measurement during the flood time is almost impossible. So there should be the new ways to validate the model, and we should also compare the different models with the same problems to at least understand how reliable the model is to predict the results and to make the better decision. So in the recommendation part, what were the main summary that came up was that Gulf being a transboundary issue, it is very important for a transboundary collaboration for better preparedness, prevention, mitigation, and of course, understanding the Gulf events in the region. And there should be the initiation of joint research for projects between two countries, sharing data information to identify the potential impacts and solution that could build the resilience of the communities. And next point was that there is a need of the standardized framework for assessing the Gulf risks to develop a holistic management strategy policy. And the very interesting point is that there was a discussion that science communication with the local people are also crucial to improve the awareness, to create the awareness to them, to understand them about the what is the lake situations.
I'm wondering, Fino, I think we cannot hear you. Jacob, would you like to continue?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
there, we can see you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah, from where should I start? I don't know if.
I think
from
just from the last point, yeah.
Is my screen visible?
Yes, it's visible.
Yes.
It's fine.
Yes.
Okay. It's in the sharing mode because okay.
Yeah, or it's fine. You can see everything.
Yeah. Sorry for that. So in the recommendation summary, what we found that Gulf being a transforming issue, it is very important for the transboundary collaboration for better preparedness, prevention, and the mitigation, understanding Gulf events. And there was a discussion that joint research projects between the two countries should be initiated, share data and information to identify potential impacts and solutions that could build the resilience of the communities. And there is a need of a standardized framework for assessing Gulf risks to develop a holistic management strategy, policy, science communication with the local policy. And there is a very good discussion about the science communication with the local people, as it is very crucial to aware them about the situation of the lakes. And lastly, on the resource funds, so there should be the resource from and the projects dedicated for the Gulf related data that should be introduced in the academia to encourage the disaster risk mitigation studies and strategies. And with the release of the guidelines for the management of the Gulfs in the India by NDMA, it was proposed to develop a guideline for the risk reduction and management of the Gulf for Nepal too. As sub guidelines has been developed for the Choralpa and Imja Lake hazard management. These should be combined together as a reference to come up with a standard guidelines for risk reduction and management of Gulf for Nepal. Is my screen okay?
Yes.
I think it's not changing. The slide is not changing.
Oh, good.
Just a minute.
Yeah, if you can unshare and share again. In the meantime, I would just like to make an announcement again that please do introduce yourself with your name, organization, and email address so we can keep in touch with you. I see a few more people signing in just now. Yes, Fino, the slide is changing now.
Okay, so I will again repeat again from this action plan. So with the release of a guideline for management of Gulf in India by NDMA, it was proposed to develop a guideline for risk reduction and management of Gulf for Nepal as well. Since we don't have so much guideline develops, but as a reference, so we have some guidelines that have been developed for the Chorolpa and the Inja Lake hazard management. So we will be combining these two together as a reference to come up with a standard guidelines for risk reduction and management of clough for Nepal. And second is that the modeling and the research on a potentially dangerous glacial lakes will be continue either in the with the support from the university student. And third is on the joint research on the transboundary glacier lakes will or need to be initiated, and this will also support the action number 2. And lastly, we discuss on the research grants so that we still don't know how to get the research grants for the young researcher students, but the discussion was that we will explore about the research grants for young students and the researchers to conduct glacial lake studies to generate the continuous data, and that will support to the hazard and risk assessment work and also helpful to prepare the guideline for risk reduction and management of GLOF. So that's all from the GLOF sessions. Kanchan, back to you.
Thanks, Vishnu, and thanks for the entire team for the discussions that were quite interesting. And I could remember that there were a lot of questions coming up also on the modeling results and how those can be validated and things like that as well. So I just wanted to invite for questions and comments at this point, if we can have a few questions for 2 minutes. Yes, Aditya, I see your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Kanchan. And thank you, Vishnu, for actually highlighting the key issues. Sorry, I could not attend the parallel session yesterday. I just had a question regarding to the risk assessment. So I assume that there was a lot of discussions also related to JC issues when we think of risk assessment from a GLOF perspective. So I'm sure, but since this is also a very technical field, and bringing on those gender nuances, or also encouraging more and more female students for those grants, I could also assume that they could be such strategies also could be a few in terms of gender mainstreaming within the GLOF sectors. So I think that was what I was assuming, if this has been discussed yesterday. Sorry, I could not attend. Yeah.
So thank you, Aditya. Actually, it was not discussed on this case, but we do have the participants from the female participants in the workshop. So as I already told, 4 were the female, and they were doing their research on the glacier and the GLOF issues. And we do have the female. I mean, still we do have the female working on the glacier lakes from the partner organization also. So yes, you are right that there are the less number of females in this kind of work, but maybe in the future we will brainstorm about that with the partner institute and try to bring the more female in this research on board. So thank you, Aditya.
I think actually it was encouraging that, especially from the Chinese side, all the postdocs and and also master students, so very junior students that were sent to present, even on behalf of their professors. All of them were female students or postdocs, which means that there is a lot of trust from these high professors, who of course have a lot of acumen already in their students to tackle these issues, which is historically a very male-dominated engineering field.
Thanks, Aditya, and thanks, Jacob. Are there any more questions or comments? Or if Jacob, if you want to add anything?
No, I think I'm fine. I think Vishnu has mentioned everything that was essential, and there are many points on the list that have to be tackled now in the near future to get this moving and actually work on the recommendations. Yeah.
Right. Thanks very much, Vishnu, Jacob, and everyone who participated in the session, who were rapporteuring as well. I think there's a great, an ambitious action plan ahead of you, and we wish you all the best in tackling those action plans. But I think the outcomes of having a standardized guideline methodology and joint monitoring plans, those will really help in the long term and actually encourage the countries as well to have better risk reduction for the GLOF events as well. So thanks very much. As we go on and listen to another set of summary, now I would like to invite Professor Rajiv Sinha to talk about what happened in the landslides and sedimentation session. Professor Rajiv Sinha is a professor at the Department of Earth Sciences at the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, and he has been a leading researcher and scientist looking at the sedimentation issues for the Koshi Basin and has published many papers on it as well. So Dr. Rajiv Sinha, over to you for your brief summary.
Yeah, thank you, Kanchan. Can I request Subina to share my slides, please? I have some problem with my Teams here.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she's doing that. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So great. We had a great session yesterday on the landslides and sedimentation. Most of this afternoon was, people were thoroughly engaged. I would say that in the Koshi Basin, landslide and sedimentation are two most important hazards, and we have been aware of this. We have also been aware of the interlinkages of these two, these two hazards, and therefore, and also, of course, the impact of these, hazards in terms of infrastructure on the ecosystem services and livelihood. So I think the introductory remarks by Santosh Nepal made it very clear why we are doing this session and what are the major objectives of this session in terms of getting a research update. And of course, also demonstrating, we had a very interesting session apart from the research updates. We had a very interesting session on the best practices for mitigation of landslide. And we saw some really nice case studies where at a local level, a lot of efforts have been made to mitigate these kind of hazards and so on. And then, of course, we had a very nice panel discussion wherein we discussed the future directions and possible collaborations and so on. So I'll get into the details of each of these in the next few slides, but it was indeed a very, very great session. So next slide, please, Subina. Yes. So as I said, this entire session was divided into three parts. Most of the other sessions were as well. In the research update session, we had 4 presentations. The first one was by Basanta Adhikari from Tribhuvan University, and he talked about the community-based, landslide disaster resilience. He also, showed a lot of nice case studies where such efforts have been fairly successful and so on. And then of course we had, very highly, technical talk by Kristen Cook and Christoph Andermann from Potsdam, Germany. And it was really interesting to see how they brought in a very innovative approach of using seismic, techniques, seismic signals to pick up, which were located far away from the landslide sites, not just to pick up the landslide event, but also to look at the hydrological response on the river, particularly in terms of the sediment fluxes. Post landslide and pre-landslide, we could see some really nice signals or in terms of the bedload transport in the rivers as well. And I think that's something which is worth exploring because, as they mentioned in their talk, these stations are located far away from the site, and therefore they are not destroyed during the event, which is a very common problem in landslide as well as the flood research as well. So that was very interesting and very encouraging to see some of these nice approaches, being talked about or being tried upon in the Koshi Basin. The third talk was done on sediment dynamics and sediment connectivity on the Koshi Basin, on which we have been working. This was presented by my former PhD student, Kanchan Mishra, and he demonstrated that how the concepts of sediment connectivity, particularly the connection between the source and the sink of the sediments is important in terms of understanding the fluxes and also understanding the spatial distribution of the erosional hotspots. It's very important to understand this concept because it is not just essential to produce sediments through landslide, but when these material are able to move forward and move downward downstream into the river, that creates another hazard here as well, right? So therefore, this connection between between seemingly different processes, landslide and sedimentation, they can be easily connected through these concepts and so on. And then of course we had the final talk by Bodo Buchhagen from University of Potsdam again, and he talked about, he gave very interesting concepts of understanding the erosional processes over a range of time scales and also a range of spatial scales as well. It is important to understand this concept as well because Koshi Basin is again one of the tectonically active basin, and therefore looking at only the modern day events or modern day hotspots is not obviously enough. We need to go back in time as well and look at if there are areas which have been active in terms of landsliding or sediment transport or erosion at a Holocene time scales as well. So that was a new perspective we got from this talk, and I think although this talk was primarily based in the on his work on the Western Himalaya in Spiti Valley, but I think many of the ideas and the processes he talked about, including, for example, the identification of the deep-seated versus shallow-seated landslide and their impact on the future sediment transport into the river, that was quite, they're all quite applicable in the Koshi Basin as well. And I think we should move forward with trying out some of these ideas in the Koshi Basin as well. After that, before I forget, it's very encouraging to see that we had a very, very nice gender balance in this session as well. We had, two female presenters as well as, and of course, three males as well. So very nice gender equality as well. And then, of course, we had, three talks in the area of best practices. The first one was on the landslide learning warning system by Prakash Singh Thapa. And he gave some really good examples, case studies, which has been done, in different parts of Nepal. And this was very illustrative to see how these early warning systems have been working quite nicely, of course, with a lot of support from the local community as well. Then, of course, we had a talk from China, Hongling Tian, and he talked about how the modern techniques, like the RTK-based GPS systems or drones or other laser scanners actually are being used in China for evaluation and monitoring of these highway hazards, again, related to landslide. But this was quite encouraging and quite interesting to see the application of these modern tools, in a very big way. So that was quite interesting as well. And then we had, another very nice talk by Nagdev Yadav and Sushil Dagal. They are from CDFAN, and again they demonstrated how they are applying some of these very good case studies in controlling sedimentation and river system management in different parts of Nepal. Our panel discussion was very lively. We discussed quite a lot of issues in terms of how to move these collaboration further. We highlighted the idea of the multi-hazard concept. I think if you go to the next slide, some of these points are in there as well. But I think the important point we kept on discussing was that we need to encourage and promote the the multi-hazard concept. I mean, these three processes, landslide and sedimentation, are already, we understand that they are very strongly interlinked as well. But then there are other hazards like GLOF, for example, or floods, for example. They're all interrelated, and therefore, I mean, for example, a landslide dam can create a GLOF, and the breaching of that can create very large sediment fluxes, and therefore, influence the flood downstream and so on. So these interrelations are not difficult for the experts to understand, but the problem still is that we are still working in isolation. We are still not trying to do this in a more formal way. We talk about this vaguely and superficially, but we see very little research, which integrates these ideas together and then produces a multi-hazard map of the area, or advances these concepts as well. So therefore, some of the major takeaways and recommendations which we thought which came from the session was, of course, we need to continue this transboundary collaboration at a regional and international scale. We need to develop a robust data sharing mechanism, without which these collaborations or these they do not really make sense. It came out very strongly in this session that the use of the modern tools like remote sensing and GIS, cell scanners, and UAVs can provide a very, very quick assessment of the landslides, and they need to be. But then the more important point is that these techniques and tools are still quite limited to the researchers, in different institutions, perhaps in a very individual capacity. But I think it's important to realize that these tools must be used by the practitioners and the agencies which are working on ground. They need to become a part of the routine investigation. Otherwise, they will remain in the research papers and they will not really yield the results which we really want to get out of it. I mean, another example is, of course, that of the seismic monitoring, which I talked about, which can provide not just some precursors, but also can provide a very good understanding of the sediment dynamics after the landslide event as well. I already mentioned about sediment connectivity, and again, there is a need to promote this work, do it at a much higher resolution, because we did it when we started this work.
Sorry, Rajiv, 1 more minute.
Yeah, sure. And then, of course, we talked about the erosion rates. We talked about community-based approaches. And another important point which came up was that what is the cost of the non-cooperation? And I think we all understand that if you don't cooperate in such matters internationally or transboundary at the transboundary level, and of course keeping in view that the very fast developmental activity in all parts of the world, I think the amount of loss of life and property we are talking about is absolutely huge. So the final slide for me, if you can put that up. So these are some of our action plans. We would like to continue the institution level regional cooperation. We would like to evolve and dwell further in the multi-hazard concept in a big way to understand the linkages between different hazards. And as I mentioned, the capacity building of the concerned department should again be a priority. And I think some of us must get together to do some kind of a training workshop on this. I mean, as I speak, I'm running a parallel training workshop on the processing of some of the old remote sensing data sets. And I think these kind of things have to be done. International community is important. As I said, we need to get out of this Nepal, India, China perspective and bring in more people who are working, maybe not on Koshi, but in similar problems and in similar areas, so that they can share their experiences and we can apply that in the Koshi basin as well. And then the final point is that we have to understand that all our scientific findings have to convert and translate it into action research, and also in terms of the policy guidelines. Otherwise, we will not go forward from here. So I'll stop here, Kanchan, and I'll be happy to answer if there are questions and queries on this section. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Rajiv. There's a good comment on the chat box. If you can see from from Ramesh Tuladar from Nepal, and he's also raised his hand. Rameshji, I would just request to keep your comment very brief, since we're running a little bit behind, but please do continue the conversation on the chat. Rameshji, would you like to make a quick remark?
Yeah.
Okay, Kanchanji, thank you.
Yes, Rameshji, we cannot hear you.
Yeah, I can see the comment, and I think I've already responded during my talk. And I think I do agree with this comment that there is a very strong need of applying some of these modern technology for mapping. There is now a very good set of data available at high resolution, and I think it's a plus. Of course, we can always generate some new data set using drones and other technologies. So I think it's a very good point, and I think I strongly support that.
Yes, please, great, Rameshji. So please do continue the discussion. I see a lot of likes already coming up on the comment that you've made. So that's great. We'll continue to take questions if there are more time available. But moving on, I would like to request Dr. Nishikant Gupta to come and present his session that he was co-hosting with Dr. Mandira Shrestha yesterday on the flood group. Dr. Nishikant Gupta is the program officer for Koshi Basin Initiative, and he has been co-hosting, co-anchoring the flood group for quite some time. And he's also co-authoring a paper on floods that is developed by the group members. So Nishikant, over to you. Tell us what happened yesterday.
Yes, thank you so much, Kanchan. And good morning, everyone. I'll be presenting on behalf of the Flood Transboundary Working Group members. And our session was held yesterday morning. Is my screen visible, Kanchan?
Yes, Nishikant.
Yes, thank you. So a session happened yesterday. We had over 50 plus participants. And the way we designed the session was there was a sub-session one which focused more on the gender responsive flood preparedness amongst the pandemic, looking at the policy and practice side. We had speed talks from UNICEF Bihar, LWR Nepal, and UNICEF Nepal as well. And this led to a panel discussion post the speed talks. In the sub-session 2, we had reducing flood risk through technology, bringing a lot of technological advancement in the field of actually looking at floods. And here we had presentations both from ICIMOD and Untitled, who is working with Google in terms of their real-time flood mapping, which I'll talk about later on. And then we had a panel discussion where we had UNESCAP, we had UN Spider, UNDP, and ICIMOD also answering a lot of questions from the panelist, Dr. Kdkh. In terms of the objective of the session, we had three major objectives. One was looking at the dual challenges of floods in 2020 and the COVID-19 pandemic. And with special emphasis on gender and sensitive flood preparedness, how women are doing during these times, and what are the steps taken to actually address those issues, their gender-specific issues as well. Definitely, the technological advancements for flood early warning. Can we club different technologies together? What is the best way forward for DRR? And also connecting high-level and local initiatives, bringing them together on a common platform. And basically also looking at how we can now focus more on not just communities, but also local governments, capacitating them to respond timely and effectively to floods as well. So in the sub-session 1, which was to do with gender responsive flood preparedness, some of the key aspects which emerged was there's a need for field-based evidence on mainstreaming gender. And one thing which came out very strongly was that when we talk about gender, we talk about both men and women, not just women. And that's something we need to bear in mind going forward. And looking at some of this, strengths, opportunities, and gaps for strengthening community resilience, bringing both men and women together as well. Definitely the need to build a capacity of local government, going up one step ahead by saying, we want to build capacity of local communities, also bringing the local government here as well. Enabling them to take leadership roles in translating both policies, the policies which are existing for local areas into actions at the grassroots level as well. Definitely multi-stakeholder partnership. We need to bring in federal and provincial government for case in Nepal, working with UN agencies, civil society, and definitely the private sector, right from the very beginning of devising a plan for a particular area as well. And overall coming more into a systematic, coordinated, and collaborative manner going forward to address this disaster. Building capacities of communities, like I mentioned, with definitely, I've underlined this point, with equal participation of women. Not just participation, but ensuring that their voices, their ideas, what they're saying is actually incorporated within the plans and policies or action plans for a particular area as well. And making them, first responders to floods with strong linkages with local government as well. And this can go a long way in flood preparedness. Some of the key recommendations which emerged from this session was a review of different policies, plans, programs, and budget allocation is key in terms of gender responsive preparedness and response. Looking at youths as agents of change. Systematic opportunity need to be created for youths at the community level for influencing policies, plans, and programs. Definitely cross-border collaboration for sustainable solution to floods, bringing in ICIMOD, UN agencies, NGOs, INGOs to come and play as a catalyst role and look at both technological and social solutions to deal with annual floods or flash floods as well. Linkages both at community to community, whether it's cross-border or within a particular setting, a local government to local government, upstream, downstream approach, and exchanging of learning and replication of good practices could go a long way in terms of dealing with floods. In the second subsession, we're reducing flood risks through technology. What we realize is that there's a need to bring in different approaches, have a more of an integrated package of approaches to prepare a more sophisticated forecasting systems for flooding. Definitely data gaps and opportunities using open access data and space technology have the potential to address complex problems. Example of citizen-sized flood alert, which Yugandhar presented with Google in Bihar, and also CBFuse. These simplified information needs were actually alerting communities, providing this real-time information to react and respond to the flood warnings and also the upcoming floods as well. Some of the key recommendations which emerged from this was a framework for cooperation to manage floods and disaster diplomacy was the key. Taking the example of the Mekong Basin as well, and seeing what good practices or good options can be incorporated and taken down for the DRR, addressing DRR and floods in the Koshi Basin. Looking beyond hydrology, looking at some sustainable development framework or climate resilient infrastructure as well could be one of the recommendations. Cooperation among agencies, like I mentioned, private sector, INGO, NGOs, to support this technology transfer, and sharing of knowledge products such as response maps. And one thing what we said was, neither natural disaster or disease outbreak respect country borders. And here I think what the panelists were saying that ICIMOD in collaboration with regional organizations, for example, SARC, can promote both science and technology through transboundary cooperation. So going forward, what we thought was way forward for 2021 and beyond from this flood transboundary working group session was one, transboundary collaboration is required. One country can't solve the entire issue. We need to look at a more basin approach. Intergovernmental cooperation is key. Definitely a need to share data and analyze products for people to adapt, to take the good practices, look at some key points which they can also replicate in their areas. Make policies aligned to local to global targets. Think big. Sendai DRR, Paris Agreement, SDG. Are we addressing these? Can we provide our actions at the national level, which can then move on to the global level? Have that thought process as well. Address sustainability issues of technology and usability. Definitely, sustainable action should be the key. Once we move out, are they still being sustainable, still being carried forward? Are they making change 5, 10, 15 years down the line as well? Integrating local or indigenous knowledge in science-based evidence. We always have this notion we are going there to educate people. How about taking a step back and saying, look, let's learn from the elderly here. How have they been living with floods, dealing with floods, and try to bring that into the policies and practices. One, increases ownership. Second, ensures long-term sustainability of any action plan for a particular area. Build capacity of local, not just the local communities, but local government as well. And document these best practices to promote both regional collaboration and build resilience going forward for the years to come, because the floods are here to stay. It's us who we have to work very closely with, the people who are at the front line of these impacts, and make all the difference for a more resilient Koshi Nation. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Nishikant, for your presentation and staying within time as well. I just want to take a few questions for this as well. I see Rakesh ji's video turned on. Rakesh ji, would you like to ask any questions or make a comment? Yeah, you have to unmute the mic. Did you want to make a comment on what Nishikanji just presented?
Kanchan, are you addressing me, Rakesh Tiwari, or?
Yes, yes, Rakesh Tiwari.
Okay. Thank you very much. Nishikanji has charted out this, in fact, the roadmap, at least for the immediate 2021 in a very proper manner. One component that we need to strengthen is the intergovernmental. Definitely, it has been mentioned there in the presentation, but how to rope in, because finally the transboundary cooperation or the sub-regional cooperation will be in the hands of government to government interaction. Once definitely the community interaction will be the final goal, but to strengthen these ties and give a push, or in terms of establishing new institutions for these collaborations, or strengthening the old existing institutions which are there, at least 7 or 8, but their regular meetings are not taking place for their committees for Gandak as well as Kosi, and the regular meetings are not taking place, and whatever is happening through via Delhi. So how to speeden up the intergovernmental activities? So there the role of government will be very helpful. So to rope in more government agencies, first for the knowledge sharing, what this Kosi group is doing, and how it can contribute government to engage more on such activities. Thank you.
Yes, Kanchan, can I take that?
Sure.
Yes. Thank you, Rakeshji. Good morning. I think it's a very valid point. We have a set of existing institutions who are already working on it, and we also have a set of this new, I would say, novel institutions also working on the same field as well. But I think that the point is, we cannot ignore either. And definitely bring in some of these core government organizations who can be of great assistance. And I think that dialogue is really important going forward. Having that one-pager knowledge product in a local language, or a more policy relevant language or a government relevant language will be the key. And try to, I feel like bringing them on board right from the very beginning. One complaint we always get is that we go to policymakers and say, you already made the plan and proposal, and now you're coming to us for assistance. So why don't you rope in us from the very beginning? And let's develop the plan together, so we feel more welcome, we feel more involved in these processes. And I think a lot more. It's hard work, of course, but going forward, I think this is going to be the key, because when I say we need to involve multiple stakeholders, we cannot leave out government institutions who are already working, the ones which are doing some side works. Collaboration would be the key at different level, both from a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach as well. So Rakesh, did I answer your question, or?
In fact, you got it very correctly, whatever the message I wanted to do. And there are instances in the last meetings I have also said that we are focusing on hazard aspect, and we are seeing the picture of non-governmental level cooperation or interactions taking place. But in other sectors, in the same basin, interactions are happening very fast. In terms of transport-related activities, energy corporations, the corporations are moving very fast. But when it comes to the age-old problem of water-related cooperation and hazard-related cooperation, things have not been that very much positive. So how we should also look into how these intergovernmental agencies are working in other sectors that can give us kind of clue also to move forward. Thank you very much.
Yes, definitely, Rakesh. Like one, I'll quickly add here. I think like wetland management, also in Bihar, I think that's a key area that needs to look into in terms of flood management, urban floods especially. So I think, bringing all those agencies together to go forward, I think would be the key. Thank you so much. Yes, Kanchan.
Yes, thanks, Nishikant. Thanks for the entire flood session hosts and rapporteurs and the team and presenters. Thanks for presenting that, and thanks, Rakeshji, for your comment. Now, moving forward, I would like to invite Dr. Vishnu Pandey. He's the Professor of Civil Engineering with the Institute of Engineering at Tribhuvan University, to let us know what happened in the drought session, what were the key messages coming out of it. Dr. Vishnu Pandey, over to you.
Thank you, Kanchanji. Good morning, everyone. Still, we are in morning, I guess. Is my slides visible?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Thank you. This drought session was held on 16th December yesterday in the afternoon. The 2.5-hour long session got the participation of more than 25 people throughout the period. This session was divided into 2 sections, each with a specific objective. First session was focused on sharing recent understanding on various aspects of the drought, where the Transboundary working group members make a presentation. There were 4 presentations. Then it was followed by a panel discussion focusing on enhancing drought resilience in the basin. The objectives, as I mentioned, first one was to get insights on recent advances in understanding drought in the Koshi Basin. And for that one, there were 4 presentations, 1 from China, India, and 2 from Nepal. They highlight
Vishnuji, I think we lost you. Can you hear us? Yes, I think we have just lost Vishnuji. Can you hear us? I think it's a connectivity issue. Okay. One option is, Saurav, for you to present, or we come back to this presentation in a few minutes later. Saurav, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Malvi.
Yeah. Would you like to try and present? Do you have a copy of the slide?
Yeah, I have. Let me share my screen.
In the meantime, please do put your questions and comments on the chat box. We're running behind a little bit, but I think it was really interesting to hear presentations on what's happening on the ground, what can be done next, and as well as what could be some of the actions from the participants in the sessions as well. So Saurav, is that okay if you can continue presenting? Yes. Thanks. Please go ahead.
Hello?
Yes,
Is the screen visible?
Yes.
Yeah, so as Pandey was mentioning, we had 2 sessions. One was on the presentation, and the next one was on panel discussion. So the objective of the session was to gain insight on the recent advances in understanding of drought, and to consolidate thought on enhancing drought resilience in the Koshi Basin. For the first objective, we have 4 presentations highlighting the various aspects of droughts. So they were discussed in the presentation on monitoring the meteorological drought, agricultural drought, also and crop water shortage index, and the presentation on regional drought monitoring system by Faisal and from Nirmalji, Madanji, and also from Professor Parsarthi. And there was a rich discussion on various types of drought indices and their suitability. So how different types of drought indices can be used to understand the drought in the region. And also there was a discussion on how these can be used for drought management and mitigation. And but we have to be wary about the underlying uncertainties in the drought forecast and projections, and the limitations so that the adaptation and mitigation action can be done properly. And for the panel discussion, we have 4 prominent panelists. And the 3 major questions that we focus on was what could be the possible area for drought risk management in the Koshi Basin? What are the possible transboundary collaboration area for drought risk management? And the way forward. So what can be done in the next year by this transboundary working group? So there were more than 25 participants during the panel discussion, and they all shared their thoughts. And the summary of the discussion, the priority area of drought risk management would be drought monitoring and mapping. So there are a limited number of stations right now, and there could be few stations that can be added for soil moisture measurement, and also the use of drought indices and earth observation can be used, and appropriate. So this could be used to actually understand the drought in the region more comprehensively. So also there is a use of drought forecasting and prediction, as well as future projection, so that this could be used by the end users actually. So the farmers and local people, they could actually use the drought forecast for the cultivation as well. And for this, what we can do is capacity building at each level. So different stakeholders from the top level to the end users, we could have a capacity building and awareness program. And because each of the regional countries have their own effort toward understanding and managing droughts, so there could be some way to actually insulate this into one effort into the whole region. And this would also help strengthen the collaboration within the region country. So the areas that where the transboundary collaboration could be done would be in data collection, monitoring, and how to analyze this data and be transferred to policymakers as well as the local users. So we can also look at developing drought-tolerant crops for different climatic regions. So not all regions have same crops. So for different seasons also we can have we could develop our drought-tolerant crop varieties, and also improve the prediction and forecasting so that the uncertainty in the forecast could be reduced. So while this is going on the research front, what we can do is we could develop a joint research and policy advocacy initiative as well. So the action of the Transboundary Working Group on risk reduction would be to focus on understanding the drought situation for monitoring and mapping, and there could be use of various work for all different countries. So we could use them for the research work as well, and we can also use the forecast of drought into for different stakeholders, from policymakers as well to the farmers as well. So to streamline this mechanism, we have to be sure that all of this information that we have generated is translated for each level differently. So the knowledge that we need for the policymakers might not be the same as what we have to do for local users and farmers. So we also need to focus beyond the biophysical aspect of the drought, and also look at the socio-economic aspect of the drought and its impact. We also have to look at strengthening the capacity of the stakeholder, so that they can also better use the information that we have generated. So for that, what you can also do is have some pilots in different ecoregions within the Transboundary Koshi Basin, and then this could help us synthesize the learning and develop practice from scaling out not just inside the Koshi Basin but other HKS region as well. So this Transboundary Working Group could also play a role in creating enabling environment for strengthening regional collaboration with the country for the drought risk management. Thank you. So if there are any questions.
Thanks, Saurav, for jumping in. And just a brief introduction about Saurav. Saurav is water and climate analyst at ICIMOD, and he's also working on drought research, and he's anchoring the group with Dr. Vishnu Pandey. And Dr. Vishnu Pandey has just joined. He had connection issues. So Vishnuji, if you would like to add a few comments or thoughts, please go ahead.
Thanks. Sorry for there was some connection issue. I was speaking, but I was already disconnected. Sorry for that. Just to thanks Saurabh for taking care. And two final points is, this drought working group was formed in September 2019 meeting in Kathmandu. We had 11 members at that time, and within this year we were able to get 3 more members, one from China, Nepal, and India each, and we are 14 members now. Welcome to the new members. And also we are able to have representation from governments from Nepal and the India for discussing important issue related to drought in during our session. That's the additional point I would like to add on. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishnuji. If there are any questions and comments, particularly from like the CBDRM group, which might see like roles, like as you see perspectives from, community-based disaster risk reduction for like landslides or like the issues of drought, then it might be interesting because yesterday in the drought session, which I was fortunate enough to attend, what we could see is that the disconnect between scientists and then the information that is coming out into with the local communities. How do you interpret those information to the communities? So if there are any comments, particularly from Neeraji or the people who were at the CBDRM group, would you like to make quick comments?
Yes, Kanchan, can I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you so much for this very interesting presentation. As you have correctly mentioned, in our group, because it is, we saw that it is heavy with floods. So we wanted to bring in some experts from drought and especially landslides and working on community-based, management. So I think this is a very good link. Now we would like to certainly work together and see how we can bring in the community aspects in CBDRM and how we can work together. I think this is a very good opportunity for us also. Thank you so much. We will work together in the coming days, Kanchan. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yes, and in the future, the group might evolve where they're contributing as part of these different groups as well, and pull in that information as well. A very quick comment from Rakeshji. I see your hand raised. Very short. We're running behind, so yeah.
Definitely, I also congratulate the team to include the drought aspect because it's a more long-term, and with the floods are very much episodic, and it gives a immediate push or creates immediate crisis. But droughts are more recurring. It affects more population, and they almost many districts in particularly in the Koshi Basin every year gets affected through drought. So drought should be one of the important pillars of this. How to manage and droughts in the Koshi Basin should be one of the important. And I really congratulate the papers presented yesterday, and where the long-term data of rainfall patterns have been utilized. And I'd like to be contributing in drought group, particularly given the recent 5 or 6 years of government initiatives to fight drought in terms of capacity building, of rainfall data collection, as well as how the energy solutions are being provided to fight drought from BR. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rakeshji. Thank you for those comments. As we move on, our next presenter, and thanks everyone for hosting, organizing these wonderful sessions in the last 2 days. And I think as we go forward, we will be really thinking about the points. The summary PowerPoint presentations are already available for you to view and access it. I've put the link in the chat box. So please go ahead and view the summary PowerPoint presentations and keep those in mind as we move forward. Now going ahead with the agenda, I would like to invite Dr. Aditya Bastola to present his paper, his presentation on Sorry, I'm just pulling up the exact title of the presentation. On gender equity and social inclusion in disaster risk reduction in the Koshi Basin. Dr. Aditya Bastola is a gender specialist at ICIMOD, and he has been working on gender water-related issues for many years. He was also a research fellow at the Saki Waters before, and he has also been strongly supporting the gender-related work at the Koshi Basin Initiative. So over to you, Aditya, please go ahead. I know we had 10-15 minutes for your presentation, so please do stick to your time and maybe leave a few minutes for question and answers if possible. Aditya?
Yes. Yes, sure. Thank you.
In the meantime, in the meantime, Rakesh, may I request you to turn off your video because there could be lags when we're doing presentations. Yeah, Rakesh Tiwariji, if you could turn off your video. Yes, Aditya, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Kanchan. So good morning, everybody, and namaste to all. So actually, I just wanted to turn my video off so that we can save on the bandwidth, and I hope that's fine. Okay. Can you see my screen, Kanchan?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So basically, JC in disaster risks and reduction in Koshi Basin. So these presentations I have actually divided into two parts. And so one is follow up to what we have heard in the last 2 days and right from opening remarks and in Transboundary working groups discussions, as well as and the things that we still need to do in terms of, when we think from a JC perspective, what still can be done better when we think from a DRR perspective. So I have divided my presentations on those lines. So let me go back to, to our discussions for the last 2 days and what we see, when disasters strike, and they strike and they are not, gender neutral. And it is often known that, disasters have more profound impacts on women than men. So, but my question is, why is it, that it is having a more larger impact onto the women than the man? So what we need to also understand here, they are different factors, intersecting factors that are intersecting, which are largely determined by a culture, largely determined by social factors, our ethnic identities, our caste identities, our economic positions where we are, our political positions, our religious practices, and also the geographical locations, whether we are located in a rugged terrain, mountain terrain, or we are located within the embankments. Actually, these are the factors that determine, our risk, our vulnerability, as well as how we respond, our roles and responsibilities, our access and control over those resources, the institutions that are, whether we are able to participate, or even if we participate, are our voices being heard? So I think these are the larger factors, the intersectionality of, these social factors, economical factors, physical factors, geographical factors, and the political factors determine our identities, whether how we cope, how we build when disasters. So for that, what does it mean when we look from a Koshi Basin perspective, and since it's very sectoral and we need to understand, in the basin, there are increasing men who have out-migrated. And so what does that implication, what implication does it have? So it actually adds on, in terms of, it adds the burden onto the women in terms of agriculture labor. And, so there are increasing impacts of climate impacts also, which we know already, where abandoning of agriculture land, lack of labor, also degradation of agriculture land. So these kind of implications, what does it actually lead to? There are greater social and gender inequality that is there. There are increasing poverty rate that is happening across the basin, and also bringing about food and nutritional insecurity, and which we have also heard in yesterday's presentation. what have an imply on. It adds on to the sociological and ecological imbalances for the region, for the basin. So yes, so given this context, so when we think from a JC perspective, so what are the things that we still need to work on? How can we actually move ahead? So one important thing we also need to work gender and media, and I think that is a very important role. And today's afternoon session, I think it's a very interesting session on media, but certainly I would like to also highlight, media has a very important role in terms of trying to bring that understanding of gender and intersectionality, so understanding why women and children are more vulnerable to disasters, and looking into those perspectives. So foremost, I think what we also need to understand when we think of media, what we have over the period, what we have always seen, that when disasters strike, we often see women at home with children. They are the victims, they are helpless, and often, the portrayal, the whole stereotyping portrayal of women and men, and men as the rescuers, they are the ones who are there. So I think media has a very important role, to recognize even those women, those men, from different caste groups who are also rescuers, who are taking active role, recognize those stories, that way women contribute strongly to ensure the food basket of the household, or the water required for domestic needs, how they have been securing all those things. Those are the things that we need to also recognize, and media needs to report on those. And foremost, I would also strongly suggest, because we still continue to lack, gender and socially disaggregated data in terms of, when we plan disaster management plans, we make plans. So I think that is also very strongly required. That would also support in media trying to bring on these gender nuances, the stories that are there before and after, and also stories that they have reported, follow-up stories that still can continue. So what we see, that media can play a strong, very significant role in terms of bringing those visibility, talking about, bringing the gender nuances, and having a disaster from a gender JC perspective, I would say, and they are the ones basically who actually enhance community resilience, also strongly engage with government, they're disseminating information, giving a feedback mechanism to them. So, but what we feel is that, when we think from a JC perspective, I think there is a strong need also to work with the media people, professionals, also build on the gender sensitivity, so that they also support those voices voices who are often unheard. So that is one important thing that we feel, media, when we think from a JC perspective, media is one field of study that we can still work upon from a disaster perspective. And second is largely about governance. When we think, in terms of decision making, what we often see is that, women are on the lower end in terms of decision. So, but to understand, there are other factors, the socio-cultural factors, the individual characteristics of individuals that are there participating in the training institutions, the socio-economic factors that are there, and even the legal and institutional factors that are driving, in terms of whether inhibiting. And most important, what we also need to understand, the role of women in DRR. Some of them, what it's very, very not uniform. Some recognize, as largely what we see is, some recognize women as victims and some as change agents. I think we need to also take a uniform recognition of this, the dialogue, discourse that is happening within the disaster management sector. So what we find is often all, when we talk about, governance and decision-making process, what we see is, when we have committees at the lowest level, at the village level, or even at ward level, we talk about DRR committees, and most of them, we are very working in tight frameworks, saying that, we have 33% reservations for women. So, but we don't move further than that. Actually, we need to move further than that, towards building, how can we strengthen, how can we bring, strengthen the association of women towards, building those agencies that are there so that women voice their rights, moving towards a transformative change that can happen, and particularly, and if we look from a DRR perspective, again, there are no, I would say till now, explicitly, policies that are bringing in gender perspectives in DRR, and where I think we still need to continue to work on gender budgeting, gender planning when we think, from a DRR perspective. So, and most important is also, when we think from a governance perspective, that we need to recognize, the informal governance processes that are happening, and we have the formal governance processes, there are institutions there, but often the informal governance where people make decisions, where they, where women come together, where they share, their knowledge, they share their practices, the untold stories. I think we need to recognize on those aspects as well. And the third component is also about transboundary corporations. We've been talking about, transboundary corporations for the last 2 days. We've seen the transboundary corporation, but often what we think is, when we think a transboundary corporation is about the formal corporations that are happening between nations, but certainly, we need to recognize that different forms of transboundary corporations, the informal corporations that are there, where people exchange their ideas, their views, and, we need to recognize those, views, ideas that are there and take into account, so that, it creates a playing field for people to come together to discuss and also to interact, share their views and open. So create a people-to-people cooperation, and that's where, where we, when the river connects people, that's where we share, that we talked about in the day before, we talked about, Koshi having a Beti Roti relations, the aspirations, I would say, the culture values. I think that is where the informal cooperation, that when transboundaries are thought, bring on those nuances, bring on those gender reflections, the people who stay, those stories from the embankment process, embankment that they are living there, the stories of those, the ideas, how they are cooperating. So I think that is where we need to also look from a transboundary corporations, and also, look from a governance processes, and that is where we need to think. And when it comes down to, in terms of, we have also thought of, okay, so what can we do next? When we often heard that, we promote, technologies, and we need to understand that the technologies that we promote, often we say, at times we say that they are gender friendly, inclusive technologies, but we need to take account that these technologies are not burning onto the women and the poor, so, and these technologies also need to be developed, co-developed with the communities that they are there, so that they take the ownership, they actually sustain, and there are examples of it already. We have examples of it also. And yes, in the earlier presentation, in the morning discussions also, we talked about, assessments. Certainly there are technical assessments also that are happening, but certainly how can we make these assessments gender responsive, assess in that manner? So how can we capture those nuances, bringing on the differential impacts, the risks that people and their solutions that men and women from different caste group have, and that is where these assessments also need to focus on, gender and socially disaggregated data, so that we can actually, make strategies and develop action plan based on those assessments. And most important aspect is very individualistic, I would say, till this. And, we often talk about gender mainstreaming, but certainly we also need to keep our mind open. We need to be, in terms of sensitive about issues, and certainly also try to understand that all men and women are not the same. They are different. So we need to recognize these differentials that are there, and not once again, fit into that stereotyping mechanism that are there. So thank you very much. So over to you, Kanchan. Yeah.
Thanks, Aditya. Thanks for making those very good points. As we consider to, implement or promote some of the solutions, how do we make it gender friendly, and how do we begin to integrate? That must begin from the very beginning, from the research aspects itself, when we're generating data itself. So if you have any questions, do put it in the chat box. Nishikant has also put in a few resources related to gender on the chat box. Do explore them. Are there any questions? I'm just going to wait a few minutes, so one minute, to see if there are any questions or comments that anybody would like to make.
I have one question.
Yes, Amirji.
Yes, I have a small question. Adit Vastola has very wonderfully presented about this gender. But here, perhaps in my opinion, we should also think of transgender community also. Men and women we talk, but also in our society, these transgender, they have a different problem. Different problem during disaster, flood, drought, or anything. Right. So that should also be taken care of. That is my point.
Yeah. Yes, I completely agree with you, Ajit sir, and I also feel, there are instances where, in terms of when we look, when resources have been distributed, when disasters occur, often transgender community, the third gender, is not recognized. In terms, they have a lot of identity crisis there. The lack of documents. These kind of challenges are very strongly shared by the community itself. So thank you for bringing that again. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. Now we're running about 20 minutes behind. So I just want to check in whether participants would like to take a very short break. I know it's difficult to stay focused throughout, but I just want to propose if we want to take a few minutes break, so then we can go into the discussion where we hear from different stakeholders, including a community champion, Neelamji, about transboundary collaboration and how it can be made effective. So can anybody just put their thoughts if they want to take a quick 2 to 3 minutes break, or shall we continue? Okay, so I'm thinking that everybody is still here with us. Nobody needs a quick break. So we will now continue ahead. Our next panel is focusing on implementation of transboundary collaborative action. We have different panelists from the 3 countries, and we will hear their perspectives on how can we make the transboundary collaborative action more effective, how can they support such efforts, and we will discuss with them. So please do put your questions for the panelists ahead. Before we go into it, I would like to request our co-host, Dr. Arun Bhaktashrestha, to make a few remarks as we go into the panel discussion.
Yes. Kanchan, I think you are doing great, but since you have put me on the spotlight, I'll just be very brief and just say that, this session seems to be the, pinnacle of the whole annual dialogue, because, the transboundary collaboration is what, is in the heart of the Koshi Disaster Knowledge Hub. And, listening to those summary from different sessions we just heard, it seems like, I was sitting in all those sessions. I think these were great messages coming out. And this last presentation from Aditya Ji was definitely a very fruitful one. But what I hear from each of those session presentation summary is that, there are specifics related to, specific hazards, and then it needs certain attention, it needs certain, actions. But one common thing is that all those, have certain level of transboundary nature. Either it is because of the hazard nature, or it is because of the community involved in it, or the classes and societal or, gender aspect to it. So all deserve a certain amount of transboundary approach to it. So what I am looking at is with great interest and curiosity to hear from eminent panelists who are going to touch on those issues and talk about what actions actually need based on what has been reported and of course based on their rich experience, what actions need to be taken in the future, which will definitely help Kdks to progress further, move forward in the future. So with that, I'll stop here and hand it over to you. And again, very excited, with what I am expecting is going to be a very interesting panel discussion. Kanchan, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Arunji. Now, first, I would like to pose two questions to all the panelists, and I would like to request to keep your remarks brief, so between 3 to 5 minutes for your response. Question number one is, what are your recommendations for transboundary working groups? You've heard their presentations, you've heard the summaries. What do you think should be the priority as we move ahead? And the second question is, how can the transboundary collaborative efforts can be made effective? So we heard about, we need enabling environment, but how do we make that enabling environment, and how can you support it? So I'll put this question on the chat box as well to the panelists. I will also request Mr. Rakesh Shah from LWR, Lutheran World Relief, to kind of help translate this session as needed for one of our panelists who has joined us today, and we're very lucky to have her, Ms. Neelam Natak, coordinator of the Transboundary Citizens Forum, Saptari. So would you, Rakeshji, would you like to translate these questions for her?
Sure. So Neelamji, Sarvanji.
Yes, sir.
Okay. निलमजीलाई केमा चाहिँ कुन ल्याङ्ग्वेजमा सजिलो हुन्छ? हिंदी. ओके. नीलम जी, हम लोग जो फील्ड लेवल पे जो कर रहे हैं और ट्रांसबाउंड्री कम्युनिटीज जो नेपाल और इंडिया के कम्युनिटी हैं जो कोशी के दोनों साइड में रहते थे, तो उन लोगों के लिए समस्या समाधान के लिए, ये विपद जोखिम न्यूनीकरण के लिए जो किस तरीका का प्रावधान हो, व किस तरह के से अगर हम लोग गवर्नमेंट के हिसाब से हो या कोई नॉन गवर्नमेंट के हिसाब से कम्युनिटी को देखते हुए क्या किया जा सकता है जो जिस कारण से उन लोगों को जोखिम कम हो सके. सो इसको भी थोड़ा समेट लीजिएगा. थैंक यू.
Thank you for the translation.
Okay, अभी आपका टाइम आएगा तो बता दीजिएगा. Thank you.
So maybe we hear from her first, Rakeshji, since we started off in that direction. I think it's great to hear from the community representative about what is happening on the ground and what are the experiences learned. So I would like to now invite Ms. Neelam Natak, is a resident of Hanuman Nagar, Kalini municipality in Saptari, which is under a huge risk of floods. And she is a social activist and a leader who has been raising voices of the people for reducing disaster risks and securing livelihoods in the Koshi floodplains. She's also a member of the Community Disaster Management Community and the coordinator of the Transboundary Citizen Forum. The forum connects the upstream communities of Nepal and downstream communities in India for disaster risk reduction and flood early warning. She's also a gender champion of the community and an advocate of gender equity. So Neelam ji, we just introduced to you, so perhaps you can answer those questions and also share a little bit of your experience, which would be really beneficial for us.
नीलम जी, आपका परिचय जो है यहाँ जो उपस्थित हैं ऑनलाइन में सबसे हो गया है. आप कृपया अपना अनुभव कोशी क्षेत्र में आप लोग कैसे काम कर रहे हैं और ये जोखिम को कम करने के लिए किस तरह का सहयोग का अपेक्षा करते हैं, इस बारे में थोड़ा बता देने के लिए अनुरोध करता हूं. बीच में मैं आपको रोकूंगा क्योंकि मुझे ट्रांसलेट करना पड़ेगा, इसीलिए थोड़ा एक मिनट जितने का बोलने के बाद आप थोड़ा रुकिएगा, मैं ट्रांसलेट करूंगा, उसके बाद फिर आप कंटिन्यू कीजिएगा. धन्यवाद। आप शुरू कीजिए नीलम जी।
जी नमस्ते सर।
नमस्कार।
नमस्कार सर। पहले मैं अपना परिचय देता हूँ। मेरा नाम नीलम देवी नायक। मैं कोसी नदी अंतर सीमांत नागरिक मंच समुदाय के संयोजक में काम करती हूँ और मैं अपने समुदाय में सबसे पहले समूह बनाते हैं। समूह के अंतर्गत सबसे पहले काम करते हैं, जबकि विपत्ति के समय में सबसे पहले अपने समुदाय में हर व्यक्ति को जानकारी रखते हैं कि पूर्व तैयारी में रहें। और इसके अंतर्गत कोसी बैरेज से संपर्क में रहते हैं। अगर कोई विपद आता है तो वहां से हम लोग को खबर मिलता है। और उसके बाद वाडा कार्यालय और जिला स्तर में से खबर रखती हूँ और उसके अंतर्गत हम लोग को उससे सहयोग मिलता है।
नीलम जी थोड़ा रुक जाएगा, मैं एक मिनट मैं इधर बता देता हूँ तो फिर कर।
ठीक है।
For everyone, Neelam ji just introduced herself as a CDMC member and Transboundary group coordinator. She in her communities they have a community disaster management committee, which is also very active for early warning information access and disseminated to the communities. She informed that she receives information from the Koshi barrage too, because they are downstream of the Koshi barrage, and also through the ward communities and the district. And whenever they have early warning from the reliable sources, they disseminate. She leads dissemination of the information within the communities. हाँ नीलम जी कंटिन्यू कीजिए।
और सर उसके बाद ऊपर समुदाय से खबर लेके नीचे समुदाय में हम लोग काम करते हैं। और इंडिया को भी हम लोग सूचना देते हैं कि पूर्व तैयारी आप लोग भी कीजिए। जिस तरह हम लोग करते हैं उसी तरह हम लोग इंडिया वाला को भी सूचना देते हैं। फिर उसके बाद समुदाय में उसी ढंग से काम करते हैं और महिला पुरुष मिल के काम करते हैं। जैसे कि इस बार हम लोग के गांव में बाढ़ आया था तो बांध टूटने वाला था। सुन रहे हैं ना सर? बांध टूटने वाला था तो फिर महिला पुरुष अपना पूर्व तैयारी किए हुए थे और जब देखें जो अब नियंत्रण में नहीं रहने वाला है तो महिला पुरुष मिल के वाडा कार्यालय में खबर किए और सारी रात जाके वहां पे जो करना काम किए, मिट्टी भर के बोरा में वहां डलवाए। फिर वहां सारी रात जाके वहां का समस्या हल हुआ।
रुक जाइए नीलम जी, मैं बता देता हूँ। She also says that the communities in Hanuman Nagar also have linkages with the upstream communities in Nepal, from where they get information on the flood situation and the early warnings. And similarly, they also have a connection with the downstream communities in India, so that whenever they receive any information on flood or the situation upstream, they transfer it to the downstream. In the communities, they are sensitized for both men and women engaging in disaster risk reduction. In the last flood, the embankment was about to breach. So when they got the information about that, they tried to control it through sand fillings and also informing the relevant government offices like ward offices, municipalities, and they were engaged whole night to prevent the disaster there. नीलम जी कंटिन्यू कीजिए।
जी, और हम लोग पुलिस प्रशासन को भी खबर किए और वहां से पुलिस प्रशासन भी आके हम लोग को सहयोग किए और हम समुदाय में एक जेंडर चैंपियन के अधिकार से भी काम कर रहे हैं और अधिकार से भी हम काम कर रहे हैं अपने समुदाय में। और
Okay, रुकिए जमता जी. Yeah, like there was also coordination with the security forces for reconstruction of the embankment, and she is also a gender champion in her communities and to look after the gender issues. हम नीलम जी.
जी, और इंडिया नेपाल के अंतर सीमा के अध्यक्ष भी हैं।
ओके, तो अंतर सीमा का कुछ एक्सपीरियंस बता दीजिए, आप लोग को क्या समस्या है और अभी आप लोग क्या कर रहे हैं?
Yeah, Rakesh ji, if I could ask a direct question for her, is what is the main success factors? What is working so well that is connecting these communities and helping with the transboundary collaboration? What are the main success ingredients?
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Yeah, I was okay. नीलम जी, आप थोड़ा स्पष्ट रूप से बता दीजिए, जैसे आप नेपाल और इंडिया का कम्युनिटी जो जुड़े हुए हैं ट्रांसबाउंड्री सिटीजन फोरम से, इससे जो है क्या फायदा हुआ है और आप लोग को अनुभव कैसा रहा इसमें?
जी सर, जैसे हम लोग भी इंडिया को सूचना करते हैं, दोनों तरफ से हम लोग को सहयोग मिल रहा है। जैसे कहते हैं कि नेपाल और इंडिया पड़ोसी देश हैं, तो पड़ोसी तो भाई हो गया। तो उसी तरह हम लोग काम कर रहे हैं, भाई भाई में फर्क नहीं कर रहे हैं। उधर से हम लोग को भी खबर करते हैं और हम लोग भी खबर करते हैं। दोनों नेपाल और इंडिया मिलके अपना काम कर रहे हैं।
Okay, so she says that there is a brotherhood relationship between Nepal and India communities. So they also relay the information downstream, and also the people from downstream have a communication with the upstream, and it is going on good. हाँ नीलम जी, थोड़ा सा कुछ फायदा हुआ है दोनों कम्युनिटीज को, अगर हम लोग जो आप लोग कर रहे हैं दोनों कम्युनिटीज मिलके जो ये ट्रांसबाउंड्री किए हैं, इसका कुछ फायदा दिखे हैं तो बता दीजिएगा। I was just asking her about they have some benefits for transboundary communities collaboration. Yeah.
जी, हेलो सर।
जी हाँ नीलम जी, कंटिन्यू कीजिए।
पूर्व सूचना मिल रहा है। पूर्व सूचना मिल रहा है सर।
Okay, so they receive early warnings. Yeah. Okay, madam.
Yes, Rakesh. So we'll come back with more questions. So requesting all the participants to put your questions to Neelam ji and Rakesh ji in the chat box. So we'll come back again. We heard that there's a good communication between the neighboring communities. They're able to connect with each other very, very efficiently and able to share early warning. One of the questions that I would like to ask is like, how do they share benefits? Of course, the downstream communities are getting early warning messages, but what is the benefit for the upstream community to share those information is one question, Rakesh. I would like to come back to her. But now perhaps we can move on to our other panelists. Now, may I request Dr. Wu Yan Hong, who is currently the professor at the Institute of Mountain Hazards and Environment at the Chinese Academy of Sciences. His research field is in mountain eco-environment with special focus on mountain biogeochemistry, and he's currently the director of Branch of Sustainable Mountain Development, Kathmandu Center for Research and Education. So Dr. Wu, I would like to again ask the same questions to you. What are your recommendations for the transboundary working groups who presented the summaries? What should be their priority, and how can this collaboration can be made effective? And is there any way that you can support such efforts as well?
Okay, hello everybody. Hello Kaishan. Thank you very much And firstly, I'd like to say just before the summary of all the sessions is very nice. And actually, I didn't participate all the sessions, but I'm sure we have achieved a lot through these sessions. So to your two questions, Kanchan, I try my best to give an answer or reply to your response to your questions. To your first question, I think the first thing I would like to recommend is we still need to more research in this region concerning all the disasters. We need new knowledges about the disasters and the new method to monitoring and prevent and mitigate the transboundary disasters. And on another aspect, I'm thinking about that the disasters in Koshi River Basin under the climate change situation and even human activities background, I think the disaster is not only the floods, the gulf, the drought. I think we should include in some ecology and environment disasters. For example, the diversity lost and environment deteriorations, and for example, the water quality deteriorations. So for these aspects, I think we need more research work to understand the regularities of these environment changes and the mechanism of these disasters happening. This is the first recommendations. The second recommendation, I'd like to say we need to construct a network for observations. Actually, if we want to probe into the disasters happening, what trigger the disaster, and what caused the ecology or environment change, we still need more data, more information. So we need some long-term monitoring systems. Maybe in Koshi River Basin in Chinese side, we have gradually install some instruments to monitoring the environment change. But I'm sure it's not so. It's not enough to get more detailed information from these regions. So the second recommendation is to construct a network of observation. The third recommendation from me, I think we need to transfer the knowledge. We need to disseminate the knowledge to the communities, to the local people, and also to the government. Just in some summarize of sessions, we need science to policy transferring. So the third recommendation, I want to say we need to transfer the knowledge. We need to fill in the gap between science and policy from different aspects. This is to your first question. What I'm thinking about. I think from three aspects. I just thought about this. And to your second question, how can transboundary collaboration made effective? I think, firstly, we still need a network. This network may be a global network. We should establish a network of scientists and policymakers and stakeholders and even some other communities. So that's maybe we can say it's a community-based network. We should, based on this network, to make some work more effectively, to diminish the gap between the countries, or the gap between the science and the policies. This is my first suggestion. And the second, we need more exchanges. Firstly, we need more exchange on more aspects exchange. For example, we need more personal exchange, more knowledge exchange, and more information exchange. For personal exchange, as you know, from Chinese side, we now can provide some chances for young scientists and students. We provide different people from other countries. So we also need some exchange of knowledge. As you know, the Koshi River originates from China and flows through Nepal and discharging to India. So we have different levels of the knowledge for all the informations around this Koshi River. So we need more exchange about the knowledge, about the information, considering this, considering the Koshi River basin. And we also need different levels exchange. For example, I can't remember in whose summarize of sessions. We need formal exchange. The officers, the scientists, and some and the students. We also need some informal exchange. For example, to the local people, to the companies, to the different stakeholders. Yeah, we need different levels of exchange. This is the second. The third, I think we all know we need more funds to make the transboundary cooperation made effective. So the fund, I think now from Chinese side, from Chinese government, we can find some way to fund the funds to support our work, to support the transboundary disaster mitigation. We need funds more from more aspects to support this work, and also we need more funds from not only from the government, but also we need from the different stakeholders. This is third, the funds we need. Maybe it can make the transboundary collaboration more effective. And last, you ask how can we support it? I think on the panel, besides me, other panelists are officers from the brief introduction in your last email. So I'm a scientist, just working the science of environment change in Koshi River Basin. Focus on environment change or ecological change in Koshi River Basin. How can I support this? I think, firstly, I can provide some opportunities for young scientists to study in my group, in our institute, or in Chinese Academy of Sciences. And another thing is I can be, and I would like to be the coordinator of different groups. I can negotiate for the research group with Chinese institutions or some governments levels. For example, from Chinese Academy of Sciences and some local government, we can try to find the opportunities to get more opportunities to develop collaborations. Okay, that's my response to your two questions. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. I think the last point you made about that you volunteering to coordinate, I think that is one of the very challenging jobs. You know, the as you can see, for particularly for knowledge sharing, for networks, for coordination, collaboration, a lot of effort goes into it, and we really need you know, your support in terms of coordinating because it takes a lot of time and effort, but then the results might not come very quickly. You know, it's not like a development project where you see, you know, buildings or things coming up, but the coordination partnership, it's very invisible, and to very tangible outcomes are hard to see until many years later. But thank you for volunteering for that role, and I would like to request all the participants to please put your questions, comments on the chat box. As you can see, the discussion is getting quite interesting. So I'll come back to you with further questions, Dr. Wu. Now, for our next panelist, may I invite Dr. Atul Pandey. He is the head of geology department at Patna University, and he has also been a supporter of the Koshi Disaster Knowledge Hub. He's also conducting many research in the Koshi Basin. So may I please invite Dr. Atul Pandey to make his comments on the two questions. The two questions are again on what should be the priorities for the Transboundary working groups. If you heard the summaries, you know, what are your feedback to them, and how can the Transboundary collaboration made more effective, and how can you support it? Dr. Pandey, are you able to unmute your mic? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear. Am I audible to you, Kanchanji?
Yes, very much. You may also want to turn on your video a little bit so everybody can recognize you.
Okay, I just wish to save my bandwidth because the network is not strong here. But
okay.
So anyway, so just have a look, and I'm Atul Aditya Pandey, as mentioned by Kanchanji, that I'm looking after the Department of Geology. And for the last couple of years, I started investigating Koshi Basin, particularly with respect to the recurrent flood, which we have in the state of Bihar. Going by the literatures available in the Koshi Basin and the questions put forward to me, I have to say that, first of all, the problem of Koshi Basin is not new. This is going on for years and years, but with respect to time, with developmental changes, with respect to the climate change scenarios, the Koshi Basin as such is changing, and the landscape, the natural resources, the human community, they are all being affected by so-called many of the natural factors and disasters. So my first opinion is that besides the scientific investigations, the technological interventions with respect to flood, landslide, sedimentation, and drought, which we generally we are using them for mapping or forecasting and management of the basin, two more important natural factors must be taken into account. That is the seismicity in the region. Seismic activities in the region is also affecting people. And another aspect is about the lightning action, particularly in the state of Bihar, that is in India. The lightning in the Koshi basin is affecting the population. So these two aspects also must be taken into account in the transboundary working group. And regarding involvement of community, what I feel is that already talked about, that the youth must be involved, because they have the because in the state of Bihar there is a huge migration of the younger population to other parts of the country. So if the youths are involved, the capacity building is there for them, so they can look after. Now we have to think of how we can achieve. What are the mechanisms where the other collaborative countries, they are looking after this aspect as to how migration could be checked, how the local population could be sensitized, how the capacity building of the community could be built up. So for these things, what I recommend is, my recommendation personally is that the collection of data, the processing of data and analysis with respect to the natural factors as well as the capacity building factors must be taken into account. The result so obtained after discussion with the community, it should be shared with the government agencies, and it could be emphasized upon to take the issues in their plan and policies. One more aspect which I would like to make here, that the basin is prone to disasters, and since in our country the disaster is more during the monsoon season due to floods, and as mentioned earlier, that the drought is also started affecting the basin, where we have the issue of water scarcity, we have the issue of water pollution, the contaminants. These are some of the issues which have cropped up recently. So the whole area must be investigated in totality, and it should also be talked in terms of the climate change, the agricultural practices, the water resources which are affected, the migration of populations, and how the institution can be associated with these issues. Myself in the academia, one aspect is that as far as the support is concerned, the youth of the area may be mobilized, and we in university are also reaching out to the community, the outreach activities and the outreach support with the academic institution they are making. So those areas which are nearer to the local community, the youth could be emphasized upon to, and the faculty members and the university administration, the academic administration, they should be encouraged to work in close collaboration with the community so that the issue is more sensitized. So there are other issues also, which if I am permitted, maybe I can talk about in after a few minutes. And I'm thankful to the participant from Nepal, Neelam ji, which she has shared that how the two countries, the community, they are interacting and they are helping each other in passing on to the information. I'm thankful to Dr. Wu from China, who has rightly emphasized about the issue of ecology, environment, water quality, and network of observations in the area where we can think in more detail and work hand in hand. Thank you, Kanchanji. These are some of my points which I would like to share with you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks, Dr. Pandey. I think that was really helpful that to bring in other transboundary issues as we're looking at in these working groups, but also emphasize youth and capacity building and interact with other institutions as well. Now, please, participants, do put your questions and remarks in the chat box below. Now, I would like to request Dr. Suman Bishop to share her remarks. Are you online?
Hi, Kanchan. Yes, I'm online.
Yeah, if I can introduce you briefly. Dr. Suman Bishop is a senior gender specialist at ICIMOD, and she has over 20 years of experience in health and livelihood and climate change and gender. And yes, Suman, please go ahead and share your thoughts on how can transboundary collaboration be made more effective, particularly from the gender aspect. And if you have any thoughts and comments on what Neelamji also just shared earlier would be great.
Sure. Thank you, Kanchan. I'll switch off my video now to save my bandwidth. And I have just 3 slides to show, which has my where I've put down my thoughts. So I'll share that if that is okay.
Sure.
It's just loading. So give me a minute. Sorry, it's just taking a little bit more time than I expected. Okay, let me not share it. Let me just go ahead with my with what I have in mind. Actually, before I talk about the 2 questions, Kanchan, that you had shared, I'll also take this opportunity to just recap a little bit on importance of gender inclusion, gender equality and social inclusion. Aditya has actually made my life very easy because he has already shared quite a bit. But still, there are 3 or 4 key points that I want to highlight for the Transboundary Working Group to remember. I think this is very relevant for us when we talk about gender inclusion in any of our work, and especially floods or other disasters. The first thing that I've been hearing since morning, a lot of the presentations have talked about, community. As one term, there has been a lot of talk about reaching out to community, working with community, including community in our decision making. We also heard about citizenship science and things like that. But what we do need to remember that community is a diverse group, and men and women both are a highly diverse group. So when we talk about floods, we need to remember that just because it is women are not necessarily vulnerable to disaster. Not all women are vulnerable to disaster, and not all men are equipped to deal with disaster. The capacities and vulnerabilities to deal with disaster depends on how caste, class, education, position, religion intersects with gender identity. So when we talk about community, it is very important that we break down the community into these specific groups in all our work. And our strategies to reach out to these communities should depend on what are their specific vulnerabilities and capacities. The second point I want to raise is gender is not just about women. Aditya had also spoken about it. We had heard Nishikant talk about it. But what we need to remember when we are planning our work, whether it's flood preparedness or relief or rehabilitation or development, is that women and men have different needs. They have different vulnerabilities. They have different capacities and access to resources. And therefore, our strategies need to take all these things into account. Now, Aditya talked about in his presentation on how more women die in disaster, which is true, but it is more true of South Asian countries. If you look at the data from disasters in South Asian countries, we see that more women die because of their position, because of social roles, and also because their reluctance to use public spaces as safe spaces. But if you look at Western countries, if you look at Europe, we find that more men die in disaster because more men are involved in relief work. And so, your vulnerability as man and woman would depend on which context you come from, and we must keep that context in mind and design our programs accordingly. The third important point when we talk about women, and that I have heard in a lot of presentations yesterday also, is while we are involving women, when we are doing gender inclusive flood preparedness, we are making sure that women are involved in our CDRMs, in our community disaster risk management groups. But we are also hearing the challenge is that gender inclusion is not as effective as it should be. There is still a problem of participation versus representation. So, whether we are involving men and women from the community as mere participants in our processes, or we are really giving them voice as decision makers. And are we setting up processes in place which makes that possible is very important. The fourth point is in terms of capacity building. And again, this has been raised again and again, capacity building of local governments in different contexts in terms of technology. But we also need to invest, if we really want to do GESI work, we also need to invest heavily in capacity building of local governments in gender analysis in flood preparedness work. If we want to really design and deliver policies and programs which address gender equality and social inclusion. And doing that will not only help us to have more responsive programs, but it will also help us in developing monitoring and evaluation framework which are gender responsive and socially inclusive. And that is one area which is right now really missing. So we might still be doing some kind of work in terms of gender equality, in terms of designing programs, but definitely not in terms of monitoring and evaluation. And that is a big gap that we need to address in our work. And the final point I want to make before I move to your two questions, Kanchan, is that, this whole thing about having women versus having gender experts and gender champions. So there are places, when we talk of community, yes, we need to have more women and we need to give them more spaces to voice their opinions, to hear them. But when it comes to technical work like research, or when it comes to, preparing, designing policies and programs, merely having women as representatives of women is not going to be helpful. We need gender experts, and in places we need gender champions. So it's not just enough to say that we have a woman flood expert, who can also bring in gender issues. Women can be as blind to gender issues as men can be. Sometimes they can just be technical experts. So we need to make sure that if we really want to do GESI inclusive flood preparedness or disaster response, we have gender experts and gender champions in our work. So these are the few points in terms of gender equality and social inclusion that I wanted to highlight again and again. I think we need to hear these messages if we really want to incorporate them in our work. Now, in terms of your first question, where you talked about, how do we, what should be the priority of Transboundary Working Group? What would we suggest that they do? I think, again, and I'm only going to talk about from gender perspective because there are a lot of other examples coming from other experts. The priority, of course, is transboundary flood risk management. I think, and when we do the transboundary flood risk management, there are three things from a gender perspective that I would like to highlight. The first is flood early warning systems. Now, transboundary flood early warning systems or community-based flood early warning systems, as we also heard from the community representative between Nepal and India, a lot of experiments are being done around that. We are really developing networks where we are able to do real-time data sharing. But we also need to understand that a lot of these flood early warning systems depend on technology. And we know that women's access to technology is still limited. So when we are talking of flood early warning system reaching out to community, it is important for us to know who it is, who the message is being delivered to, and what is the system in place to make sure that everybody is receiving that message. So again, as I said, just because it is reaching to a woman is not enough to make sure that it is reaching to all women. It is a woman of which class, which caste, which religion, and how are we making sure that the messages are reaching out, and how are we making sure that women have proper access to technology, and that gap is being addressed. The second thing in terms of the risk management, and which I heard a lot of people, especially Neera in her presentation and others talk about, is collaborative research and risk assessments, which we need to do with community. And so if we are doing transboundary collaborative research and risk assessment, then we need to make sure that we involve community in that, and we make sure that women have voices in that. So the designing of these collaborative research is very, very important. Presence of gender experts in these collaborative research and risk assessments are very important. And that is something that we really, we need to highlight. Understanding what are the specific needs, capacities, vulnerabilities, and access to resources of men and women in these communities is very important. So all those things that I highlighted in the beginning need to be addressed in these collaborative researches. And the third aspect when we talk about transboundary flood risk management from a gender perspective is community to community linkages across border. So while the initiatives are being set up, but I think this is one area where a lot more work can be done, where community from across the borders can send out messages to each other. I also heard a term, I think, the citizens network that can be developed, where again, involvement of women from communities across the border is very, very important. So this is in terms of, priority setting for the Transboundary Working Group. In terms of collaborative, in terms of transboundary, how can we make transboundary collaboration more effective? I'm going to talk more at the community level. And this is something that I heard in yesterday's presentations on the flood session. Especially when we heard voices of the local government. And they talked about how it is very important to develop transboundary cross-learning mechanisms, especially between local governments and between communities. And within this, we heard two main important things. One is awareness raising. So representatives of local governments highlighted that the impact of actions upstreams and downstreams can be seen in terms of flood risks. So what happens downstreams or what happens upstreams can enhance the possibility of floods, either upstream or downstream. And unless and until local governments from across the border from transboundary don't understand these issues, are not aware of how their actions can impact the other, it will be very difficult to establish cross-boundary collaboration. So awareness raising among local governments and communities, helping them understand the risks and impact of upstream downstream actions is very important. The second part is also learning best practices, establishing knowledge networks between communities, and especially between women from across the border is also very important. Sometimes seeing is believing. And we have had a very good example from Nepal, where we had done very extensive flood preparedness training with women from migrant sending households. So these were households where men were working in other areas, in other places, and women were at the forefront of dealing with flash floods in their communities. So having trained them on flood preparedness, what we found is when the 2015 earthquake happened and a lot of communities got affected by earthquake because they were not really prepared for this disaster. And we organized an exchange visit between the community where we had done flood preparedness with women to the community which was affected very badly by the earthquake.
Suman, I request you to.
Yeah, so this is my
1 minute.
last point. Yeah, this is my last point. So these women were really able to help the women from the earthquake affected villages to understand the importance of preparedness, of anticipating risk and preparing for it. So sometimes these cross exchanges between communities can really help to bring out the point on flood preparedness and some learning about the best practices. So this is my final point, Kanchan, and I end my feedback here.
Yeah, thanks very much for those useful feedback. And I think the session hosts and session anchors are still here attending and listening to these comments. So I'm sure this will be quite useful for everybody. We're running a little bit behind, but we have 2 more panelists that we would like to hear their perspective on. I would like to invite Mr. Ajit Kumar Samiyarji from Bihar State Disaster Management Authority. He previously worked as senior advisor to BSDMA, and currently he's working with BSDMA member Dr. UK Mishra. So Samiyarji, 2 questions for you is how can we make this transboundary collaboration more effective? How can you support it? Your brief remarks, please.
Thank you, Kanchanji. It was a long deliberation, and I'm sorry that I could not take part in earlier sessions of yesterdays and day before yesterday. I was only informed by Vyasji yesterday. So thank you for inviting me. You have put before me 2 questions. So I would respond one by one. I have very in brief, I have some points to respond. First is what the question was, what are your recommendations for the transboundary working group and what should be their priority? So my point is that upstream and downstream linkages should be established. It is a generic term, but it is more important that linkages upstream and downstream should be established to share disaster events near real time. That is the most important point, is near real time. This is my experience that when I was in active government service, we were developing a model, a flood forecast and inundation model for Bagmati and Koshi basin. So we were dearth of data, and data particularly real time. So that was an issue that we could not develop the model very efficiently, though it has, I have come to know that this is working. Second point is that early warning system that is being developed, that has been developed by NGO in collaboration with ICIMOD Yuvantar in some of the small rivers in the Koshi basin, like in Ratu and Khando rivers. This action should be encouraged to prevent hazards upstream leading to disasters in downstream areas, because there are a network of small rivers in Koshi basin, and if such type of early warning system is developed, then it would be beneficial for both the sides, the India and Nepal side. And third point is that I would stress emphasis that priority should be to identify potential areas of collaboration. We can point out which are the potential areas, and it should be shared with researchers and decision makers. So these are the points to and respond to your first question. The second question, how can the transboundary collaboration be made effective and how can you support it? So to respond this, I have 3 points to deliberate. One is transboundary collaboration can be effective if knowledge sharing is encouraged through online platforms. So online platform is important because now everything is being worked on the online, and internet services are very, very popular, and it's working fine. So this should be, the collaboration should be effective in knowledge sharing, and if it is encouraged through online platforms. The other is the dialogue between researchers and decision makers should be established time to time to find out collaborative solutions. Third point is, because I had been working and still I'm working with BSDMA, Bihar State Disaster Management Authority. And this agency, this authority is continuously working on elements of disaster risk reduction. So this can play an important role in resolving specific transboundary issues. So I would suggest that ICIMOD should collaborate with BSDMA in resolving some specific transboundary issues. So these are, in brief, I have only these points to elaborate. So thank you.
Thank you, Samir-ji. And I think we have a long-standing collaboration. ICIMOD and BSDMA has a long-standing collaboration. But we're really hoping, in the last year in the country consultation in Patna, and you were a key, figure in that country consultation as well, that you had suggested that how perhaps BSDMA can also take the lead in forming country chapters and like kind of formalizing some of the mechanisms for transboundary collaboration. And, in the opening session, Vyasji also represented his views that both the federal and the, state level government needs to come together, and our collaboration stays consistent. But I think we're really also hoping to look for how do we move to that next step of collaboration, because we are collaborating, but how do we make it more effective? So please let us know if you have any more suggestion. In the meantime, would you like to make a comment on that? Like, how do we take our collaboration to the next step?
We can just move out, because here we had one, we took much effort, but we could not succeed. But we can find out. Just give us some proposal, and I could just take in it and initiate this thing. Okay, no problem.
Thank you, Samir-ji. We look forward to working with you more in strengthening these collaboration, and particularly with the Koshi Disaster Knowledge Hub. Now we're running behind, but I would really like to hear quick points from Rafe Ejaz Hussain, who is the state manager for Save the Children Bihar. He has been working in different organizations for a long time, but then also working in Bihar for many years. Previously, he also served as a state program manager for Population Foundation in India. And then he has also background in political science and social work as well. Mr. Rafe, I welcome you for your remarks. Again, the two questions on what should be the priority and how can you support it?
Yeah, thanks, Kanchanji, and I'm very happy to be here. Though my connection was not good and I was having difficulty in connecting today. So thanks. I would straightforward come to your questions, two questions, and at the cost of repeating also, since many people have already spoken, this cross-boundary collaboration is very, very important. And though we talk about Kosi basins and we mostly focus on floods, but there are other disasters also, other hazards and risks also involved along with floods. As we all know, earthquake is one of them, but there are others, lightning somebody talked about. So I guess we have already spoken about the collaborations at 3 levels, and those 3 levels are very, very important. The first and foremost collaboration is at the government level. Both federal and state government of all the concerned nations should come together and have collaborations around these issues. Other than government level collaborations, we have also spoken about community level collaborations, and since we are mostly from civil society organizations, the third level is civil society organization level collaborations, and all these 3 levels of collaborations, I would say government collaboration is very important, and community, especially if you talk about India and Nepal. community has linkages with each other. They have family linkages, they have livelihood linkages, they have so many other linkages with each other. At the same time, civil society organizations play a very important, vital role of linking the community linkages and government linkages. So ICIMOD or Save the Children or in Bihar, BIAG, Bihar Interagency Group, all this play a great role in bringing that synergy between different levels of collaborations. I would just highlight 2 points here. So one point is that as we know that Bihar has developed a DRR roadmap for itself, and in all the 5 pillars of these roadmaps, if you go into the indicators level thing, you'll see that resilience building at the community level is the topmost agenda. So we should not just collaborate from disaster perspective. We should also collaborate in terms of resilience building perspective, and that would go a long way in building and better linkages during disaster time also. Having said that, we have also spoken. Another point I would like to highlight is that Bihar is one state where almost 46% of the total population is children, and that means that the number of youths and children are very high in the state compared to other states in India. And somebody has already spoken about the role of youth and women also. So youth and children are going to be the core of these issues, because they are the most susceptible population along with women, but they're also marvelous communicators, and if you invest in them, capacity build them, they also take proactive initiatives of reaching out to the larger population, and use of technology. Now smartphones are there, and we all know early warning system, community based early warning system things have been modeled out in these 2 nations. So those kind of initiatives needs to be widened out. It has to be scaled up, and it has to involve youth and children within the community. We have to more so talk about the resilience building within the communities, and once community on either side of the Kosi basin is resilient, then they would be able to help each other. So we need to establish those kind of communication channels within communities, within civil society organizations, within government systems. Those things needs to be built for through a clear-cut strategy. And if we have to do that, we have to work together as an organization, as networks, as geo-NGO partners, as partners with the communities, and involve youth and children, capacitate them so that they come forward, come along with the systems, work along with the systems, and then we would be able to build the systems during peace times for developmental goals, for SDGs, and also be prepared for in a better fashion for any kind of disasters. And my last point, at both these levels, see, for example, in 2015 earthquake in Nepal, we sat together as a Save the Children team from Nepal and other nations in India, and we were talking about that India being this situated in such a way, if we create some kind of route chart kind of a thing, when some kind of earthquake comes, those kind of supplies can be ensured in no time. But we have to prepare that, and those kind of collaborations and preparedness actions has to be taken before the disaster strikes. So, for example, if flood is coming every year, we have to be prepared on both sides to face those disasters beforehand. So, when the actual disaster is there and the community is affected, all the machinery, civil society, and the community is prepared to face those challenges, cope with it, and bounce back better in no time. Thank you so much. I'll stop there. But children and women has to be the focus on all these initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hussain. I think those were very important points as we move forward, that focusing on resilience and focusing on the most vulnerable population, but also considering them as resources, you know, as great communicators, and also building those bridges already in advance so that preparedness and action can happen very quickly between the two countries. So thank you for those comments. We are running very behind, but I just wanted to check in with if Rakesh ji is still here, if we have a response to the question that we asked earlier to Neelam ji, if she can share with us what is the benefit for upstream communities to share that information downstream. Rakesh ji, were you able to connect with her?
Yes, I connected with her, and I guess she is also ready with giving her answers. Shravan ji.
Yes.
Okay, Neelam ji, like चाहिँ त्यही क्वेसन चाहिँ हाम्रो जस्तो अपस्ट्रीम कम्युनिटीज लाइक के फायदा छ? नीलम जी आप हैं वहाँ पे?
जी सर।
ओके नीलम जी, आप थोड़ा बता दीजिएगा, जैसे ये आप लोग जो ट्रांसबाउंड्री सिटीजन फोरम किए हैं उसमें दोनों समिति को कैसे फायदा होता है? जैसे डाउन स्ट्रीम को तब पूर्व सूचना मिलता है, लेकिन अपस्ट्रीम कम्युनिटी को भी नीचे के कम्युनिटी से कैसे एक दूसरे को हेल्प मिलता है, थोड़ा बता दीजिएगा।
जी सर, जैसे कि हम लोग जो समुदाय में पूर्व सूचना का तैयारी करते हैं, उसी तरह इंडिया वाला भी इसे जानकारी लेते हैं। हम लोग करते हैं सो उनको नहीं जानकारी है, वो लोग करते हैं सो नहीं जानकारी है, तो मोबाइल के इसमें से जानकारी लेते हैं और उसी से हम लोग को फायदा होता है। और एक फायदा और है, जो जब बाढ़ आने की समस्या होती है तो हम लोग को चतरा से खबर मिलता है, और उन लोग को जितना खबर बैरेज से मिलता है उतना हम लोग को नहीं मिलता है, जितना हम लोग को चतरा से मिलता है उन लोग को नहीं मिलता है। इसीलिए उसी आदान प्रदान हम लोग देते लेते रहते हैं, वही फायदा है हम लोग का।
Okay, she says that one of the for early warning system, the Nepal communities get the early warnings from Chatra flood gauge and the flood gauge reader there. And for India, they get the information from Koshi barrage, and for communities of Koshi barrage in Nepal side of downstream of the barrage, it's not possible to get the clear information. So whatever information the downstream communities of India receive from the barrage, they again disseminate it to the Indian communities. So it's going on both way regarding the flood situation and sharing of information.
Thank you, Rakesh. That is a very interesting perspective on sharing the information that is being received by other government agencies, just making sure it's like similar kind of information. So thank you for sharing that. Now I would like to thank all the panelists for their views and perspectives and recommendations for the Transboundary working groups. Thank you so much, and thank you also to the presenters earlier. I would like to invite Arunji to provide us brief concluding remarks for the session for the panel before we end the session today.
Kanchan, thank you once again. And indeed, I don't want to take a lot more time because we are considerably late. I think we were supposed to end at I don't know when actually. I even lost track. 12:15, is that so? So it's quite late.
12:30.
12:30. Okay, so it's like 20 minutes late. And we have another very interesting session coming up, so I would not like to take much time. Now, I definitely would say that, as I said earlier, I think I would maybe just repeat saying that this session probably is the pinnacle of the whole annual dialogue of Koshi Disaster Knowledge Hub. And it actually hits on what actually the hub is trying to do, bringing together, different countries, sharing the basins, and of course different stakeholders, and to discuss on the aspects which needs collaborative effort of action, right? So, and that's what we exactly did. And starting from the morning sessions, again, might be repeating myself, I think we got a very nice overview of what has happened in last 2 days. And different, points came, discussion points based on the deliberation that esteemed participants had done, but also recommendation. And there were several very interesting recommendations, which I would not like to repeat here. It has just been, discussed with us. And based on that, I think we went on to this panel discussion, which was also, I think, I also congratulate. I'm part of the host group, but I think largely you have done it. So I would like to congratulate for putting together a very diverse kind of, panel, from starting from community representative, academia, government representative, all, and even from ICIMOD. I think that was what a wonderful, spectrum that was, and to get, all dwelt on that very aspect on transboundary nature, but from very different angles, from, community side, then from also from knowledge, knowledge improvement, network improvement. I think that was what, Professor Wu was mentioning. Then at the government level, what needs to be done? I think that was what Samyar Ji was talking about. Then at the local level, also taking into account the gender and social issues, I think what needs to be done. Suman Ji was reflecting on it, and then earlier on, Aditi Ji was also talking about it very specifically. I think I like the way he was kind of, giving us guideline. He did not, but almost it sounded like you have to do this, and that tells the urgency of what needs to be done. So all in all, I think that was a very wonderful session, and very informative, very educational, but also, providing some way forward for us to take us a long way. So with that, I think I would like to thank all of the presenters here, panelists here, for nice deliberation, very informative deliberation, and stop my short comment right here. Kanchan, back to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Arunji. Just want to thank all the participants today. I also want to thank Malin and Sneha, who've been rapporteuring for this very complex session. So thank you, Malin and Sneha, for rapporteuring today. And I would like to invite everybody to come join the afternoon session. It's going to be very interesting with the media, reporting on how they're doing. Tomorrow is going to be the Kdkh strategy and guidelines. So that's the main part that we want to accomplish on how do we formalize these mechanisms and what could be the roadmap ahead. So please join us in the morning and in the afternoon tomorrow. So with that, I hope we've not taken too much of your lunchtime, but please do enjoy your lunch, and we'll see you shortly. Thank you again to all the participants, rapporteurs, presenters,